Hi, good morning. Am I audible? So, in fact, I guess this is where we happened to stop in the last class, isn't it? So, I have given you the context, and as such, I'm trying to remind the state of Indian economy because when you make a plan for your long run, so everything you do now, isn't it, has to serve the interests, isn't it? The goals that you are trying to achieve in the long run. So we happen to begin with what basically the government is trying to achieve. By 2047, the government of India has a dream to see that India would be recognized as a developed country, isn't it? And how would you define Vikshit Bharat? And that's what I explained in the last class. And I also happen to explain the current challenges Indian economy is experiencing, both domestically and in the external aspects. Right? Yes. And the other thing that I happen to remind you is we are right now experiencing a rapid deglobalization. And today, I don't know whether you have been through the newspaper or not. Today, you might have seen Trump has one more time has increased tariffs on China. And definitely, at least for the next 2 3 years, there's going to be a great turbulence in the external sector. So when two big giants, in fact, like two elephants fight, and we know the fact that blades of grass beneath the elephants gets crushed, right? So imagine two economies, US and China happens to go for trade war, definitely this is going to have a huge global impact. So it is in this context I happen to explain, okay, the reason why the finance minister this year happens to give a great importance to increase the disposable income of middle class people. So the intention is at the end of the day, she want to achieve the very basic objective of boosting domestic consumption further, and at the same time has in order to ensure enough money supply or enough supply of liquidity, so that when people left with more disposable income because of falling tax burden, they would either end up saving this money or either end up spending that extra money, and that helps in enough capital creation, and that's how the private sector investment also gets boosted. So now the government, along with the government spending, also want to ensure that private final consumption expenditure and the private investments would also catch up, so that we could reach the target of minimum 8% growth rate, which is very much required for India to quadruple its per capita income. Okay, so that being the reason, in the last budget itself, Madam Nirmala Sitharaman has coined that she happens to have a primary focus on four different castes. One, the youth; the other, the poor; the third, Annadata, the farmer, and the woman. Right? So if you look at in this budget, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the current budget and some major highlights of budget worthy remembering for the examination. Okay. So first and foremost, if you look at, there are 10 broad areas of focus in this budget under these four different categories. The first and foremost is spurring agriculture growth and productivity. So what do you mean by it? Okay, so is there a difference between the term agriculture growth and productivity? Yes. Is there a difference between agriculture growth? What do you mean by agriculture growth? So increase in production of agriculture produce. Increase in production of agriculture produce. Then what do you mean by spurring agriculture productivity? What do you mean by it? See, we all know the fact that the land under cultivation in India is shrinking. Do you accept it? Because a good amount of land, a fertile, good amount of fertile land in India is being converted, diverted for commercial purposes, housing, and various other infrastructure related aspects. So the land under cultivation is shrinking. At the same time, the population that has to be fed is increasing. We are right now 140 crore people, world's largest populated country. And now the question and the challenge before India is, you cannot bring more land under cultivation. Then what is the only alternative we are left with is increase the yield per acre, output per acre, productivity has to increase. And that being the reason, maybe in your foundation course, you might have been taught about various agricultural revolutions: green revolution, evergreen revolution, golden revolution, white revolution. Am I right? So though people happen to use the word revolution, the very basic intention is to ensure a rapid increase in output, yield within India in various agricultural products. So that's what basically, as in the last class, I might have pointed out, though India happens to cultivate around 330 million tons of food grains, but we still experience a severe shortage of edible oil and at the same time pulses. And moreover, if you notice, my friends, gone are those days where India used to worry about food security. Right now, India is mostly worried about nutritional security. But the government of India, I think you might be able to recollect Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, where the Prime Minister himself promised that these free food grains of 5 kilos per head per month would be I mean, this program or the scheme would be extended for the next 5 more years. I mean, 2029, okay, around 80 crore people in India would avail free food grains of 5 kilos per head per month. So you could choose, you could either pick a rice, wheat, or any coarse cereals. So food security is not a great concern as of now. We have enough food grains to feed almost the entire Indian population, right? In fact, there are some states in South India. Take the case of Telangana. The amount of paddy state Telangana cultivates is good enough to feed the entire Indian population for 1 year. But still, there are certain concerns. If you notice in the last 10-15 years, there has been a tremendous rise in price of protein-rich food. Look at the price of egg 10-15 years back, milk, meat. So India is now mostly concerned about nutritional security. And since the spending capacity of people is also increasing with increase in per capita incomes, now people are looking for more protein-rich food, nutritional security. And that itself explains the reason why the price of pulses in the last 15 years has been consistently experiencing rise. But unfortunately, we don't have enough land enough land under cultivation of pulses. Because a good part of this land is being converted or being diverted for cultivation of various other food grains where farmers do get a better MSP or where the average cost of production could be less. So that's what I'm pointing out in the last class. We in India happens to. In fact, someone in the last class has pointed out. It is generally said farmers of India do cultivate not for sake of selling in the market, mostly for the sake of selling it to government, because the government do happens to make a commitment. You cultivate these crops, and I'm going to guarantee that I would take the responsibility if the market doesn't buy it. I would ensure that you get paid a decent MSP. So since we don't have a time, we're not going to continue the discussion for a long span of time, but let's look at the second basic focus, building rural prosperity and resilience. And the third is taking everyone together on an inclusive growth path. And if you could recollect the 11th plan, starting from 11th plan and then in the 12th plan, one of the major priority for the 11th plan happens to be bringing inclusive growth. Because let me remind you, according to World Inequality Report that was published somewhere in 2023, around 60% of wealth in India is concentrated among top 5% of wealthy population. So generally, we might have a perception the rising income inequality is a greatest concern only to the most developed countries like USA. Of course, when it comes to United States of America, people refer it's a 1% economy, of the 1%, for the 1%, by the 1%, because there's been a too much of concentration of wealth among very few rich people. But in fact, even countries like India, even for that matter, even China, though it's called as communist country, but even China, you could notice the fact there's been unfair accumulation or distribution of wealth in these countries. And that being the reason, now these countries, especially India, happens to recognize the fact until growth is not inclusive, growth cannot be sustainable. Am I right? So what's the point of reporting a very high growth when it doesn't benefit large part of Indian society? And that wealth gets concentrated among few people. So why would really think people would have an incentive to participate? Right? So if the growth happens to be in such a way that neither a good number of people have an opportunity to participate nor benefit out of the economic prosperity, then how do you really think you could sustain the economic prosperity for a long span of time? So that being the reason, in fact, you would be noticing the fact since 2013, the term inclusive growth, especially mentioned in the syllabus mains pay. Except 1 or 2 years, you have a question on inclusive growth every year. So, and I would suggest you please do focus more along with agriculture topics, the term inclusive growth and initiatives that the state of India happens to bring in to promote inclusive growth. Okay. And the third major focus for it, fourth, boosting manufacturing and furthering Make in India. So when it comes to, I think in the last class I have pointed out, Make in India is basically the slogan. The very basic objective of Make in India is to achieve import substitution. Import substitution method, how do you explain, Kristen? How do you explain import substitution? Substituting imports through domestic production. Through domestic production. But at the same time, to produce goods and services in India, I pointed out there's been a lot of hurdles. In fact, our economy, though we end up saying that we have liberalized economy somewhere in 1991, but you would be noticing out of most of the emerging market developing economies, our economy still highly regulated economy. More regulated, you could say. In fact, that's the basic reason somewhere in 2008, during the great financial crisis in United States of America, when good number of financial institutions started collapsing in USA, our Prime Minister those days has pointed out, look at our banking sector, very strong, resilient, able to withstand the global financial crisis. And the Western people immediately retaliated, saying, Sarji, it's not your banks are strong and resilient enough to withstand crisis. Your banking sector is overly protected. Overly protected. Got it? So that's the basic problem. In fact, that's a very basic reason why in the current economic survey, the economic advisor of India, in fact, I think you all know the fact, the economic survey is authored by the economic advisor of India. Can someone name the person who happens to be right now the economic advisor? In fact, his tenure has been extended for 2 more years, just 1 week back. Anyone in the class, my friends? Who is the current economic advisor of India? Yes? The current economic advisor of India. This Professor Anant Nageshwaran. Okay, so got it. So he himself has pointed out, it is high time India has to go for further deregulation. And too much of regulations is resulting in hurting the economic prosperity, because when the economy is overly regulated, that obviously disincentivizes investments, right? So and the most important is supporting MSMEs. In fact, India still, the backbone of Indian economy still happens to be MSMEs. And I'll tell you, and I'll show you the contribution of MSMEs to the Indian economy. And now let's look at the next part, the other 5. Enabling employment-led development. What's the meaning of the word employment-led development? You know, my friends, India is one of the fastest growing economy, and there is no doubt, and nothing to argue, because the facts itself point out. But the problem that we are experiencing, I think you all might heard about this term, India is experiencing jobless growth. In one of his speech, former Prime Minister of India, Mr. Manmohan Singh, also pointed out not only that India is experiencing jobless growth, India is also experiencing a job loss growth. Because if you could recollect the contribution of service sector to Indian GDP. So what do you really think is the contribution of service sector to Indian GDP? How much do you think? What's the contribution of service sector to GDP? Yes, can someone point out? My friends, is roughly around 53%. 53%. Let's round it. Okay, so let's make it 55%, so it would be easy for you to remember. But the problem with service sector is service sector compared to agriculture and industrial or manufacturing sector has a low employment elasticity. That means for every 1 unit of output, the number of jobs that service sector can add is much less than compared to agriculture sector. Just imagine if you want to produce 1 crore rupees worth of agri output, 1 crore rupees worth of industrial output, and 1 crore rupees worth of output in service sector. Don't you really think agriculture sector being labor intensive in India, and then comes this industrial sector, do have a more scope to create more jobs? But skill intensive sector, that is service sector, because service sector as such is highly skill intensive. The productivity of labor in service sector is very high. You get a software engineer, isn't it? So that being the reason, though service sector is contributing a good part to Indian GDP, but the problem with service sector driven economy for a country like India, which is a labor surplus country, is we are experiencing a jobless growth. I hope you understand what I mean to say. And that explains the reason why the current government is focusing on creating employment more, and at the same time, in order to create employment opportunities and in order to grab the opportunities, you also need a better human capital. I mean, this labor with the proper skills. इसी वजह से you might also have come across various initiatives to impart skill set among the Indian labor. National Skill Development Mission, आपने सुना ये सब? Yes. And इसी वजह से ना production linked incentive, in the last class I was pointing out, you know, the production linked incentive, an initiative to boost manufacturing within India. All right, initially it happens to prioritize labor intensive sectors. Why? The government not only want to ensure that it has to focus on increasing the opportunities or increasing output, but at the same time, every penny government spends and every incentive the government provides to the corporates to increase the output in India also want to ensure that it results in generation of more employment. Because now look at the challenges India is experiencing. Agriculture sector, last class you yourself pointed out, India is experiencing a problem of disguised unemployment, seasonal unemployment. Moreover, the productivity of labor is very very low, too much of dependency. At the same time, you know, Mr. Krishnan, around 12 to 13 million people are getting added to labor force in this country. Every year, around 12 million people minimum are getting added to labor force. Then where are you going to create enough employment opportunities? Because service sector has a very low employment elasticity and it is being highly skill intensive. It cannot create enough jobs to accommodate all these young people. Agriculture sector is already overburdened. Now, what's the only alternative we've been left with? The sector that we are not able to tap, even after liberalization, that's none other than industrial sector, manufacturing sector. Yeah, in the last class I was pointing out, even after liberalization, the contribution of manufacturing and industrial sector to Indian GDP has more or less remained stagnant. And India being one of the world's largest consuming country, India having such a great middle class base, population base, definitely has to take the advantage. The reason is we have resources, we have the market. The only thing is that we don't have a proper atmosphere or proper yes. Can someone point out what do you really think is the basic drawbacks when it comes to promoting industrial activity in India? We don't have a proper environment. In simple terms, okay, let me put it as the ease of doing business. Though we've been making a lot of, isn't it? I mean, we happen to come up with various initiatives. If you look at 2018 budget, the finance minister has brought down the corporate tax rate on an average to 22%, which used to be somewhere around 35% on an average. So we happen to bring in some tax reforms, but still there's been a great number of challenges when it comes to attracting investments. Let me remind you, long back, okay, one of the former economic advisor, that's Mr. Arvind Subramaniam. And you're saying that India has liberalized the economy in such a way. Entry of any investor to Indian economy is very free, very easy. But the exit is impossible. That means, let's suppose you invested money in economy, Indian economy. You happen to build a factory. And for some reason, the factory was not doing good. And you think of closing the factory and just you want to exit the markets. Believe in me, before the government of India happens to bring in the insolvency and bankruptcy code in 2016, it is almost impossible to exit Indian markets. So इसी वजह से ना, even in this economic survey, the economic advisor of India has explicitly pointed out it's high time India has to go for further deregulation. There's been too much of state intervention. There are too many laws. Take the case labor sector. There are almost 10 to 14 laws in India that deals with the labor sector either directly or indirectly. Industrial Wages Act, Industrial Disputes Act, Contract Labor Regulation Act. So if you keep on listing, there are more than 10 to 14 laws that still deal labor sector. It is very difficult to hire and difficult to fire. And as such, 2013 land acquisition has made it almost impossible. Look at it, simply has a provision where 80% consent is required to acquire land. And just imagine mobilizing 80% consent. No matter how productive that you would like to put the land for use, but it's really, and that too in a country like India where the environment is highly politically sensitive. Very difficult. So we have stringent labor laws, stringent laws related to land acquisition, and the problem with capital markets. Right? Then how do you really think? And at the same time, look at the enforcement of contracts. Look at the number of cases pending in the courts of law, the number of tax disputes in India. And for your surprise, one of the largest litigator in India is none other than the government of India itself. The same government keeps on criticizing the Supreme Court and other courts, saying that there have been too many too many cases filing, too many cases pending. Right? You all might have heard about this thing called justice delayed, justice denied, and all these things. But you would be surprised to one of the largest litigator in India is none other than the government itself. So improving ease of doing business is first and foremost. Take the case, you all might have heard about the success story of Singapore, right? In fact, somewhere in the mid 1960s, Singapore has been thrown out of the Malaysia. This is we don't want. You are the one of the most corrupt part of the India, the entire world. And look at now how Singapore, it doesn't have the resources that India has. But this city state has really transformed to one of the, it's as a global hub. And Singapore passport is one of the world's most powerful passport. They could visit any country without any prior visa requirement. Visa and arrival is available. Such a world's most powerful passport. It's a small island state. So what's required is not that resources. Of course, definitely a potential GDP of a nation is determined by the resources, natural resources, human resources. But at the same time, there have been many small nations. Look at South Korea. Just compare the size of South Korea with India. Do you really think South Korea happens to have some extraordinary resources that India doesn't have? No way. Right? Or for that matter, take the case of any European nation. You could just simply, fit 20 Germanys in India. So what is really required for a large amount of economic activity to take place is a proper environment. And that's what this man is pointing out. Got it? And the other major focus is investing in people, economy, and innovation, securing energy supplies. So now let me focus on securing energy supplies. The reason why is because we all know the fact roughly around 70 to 80% of Indian oil requirement is still met through imports. Of course, we don't have enough oil and gas reserves, no way, no doubt. But at the same time, not only we happen to heavily depend on, but at the same time, our import dependence is also concentrated among, on very few nations. So majority of our oil import is from Middle East nations. Now you might think, what is wrong in importing oil from Middle East nations? There is nothing wrong. But again, imagine if you concentrate or if you have a more dependence. Let's assume that there is some disturbance in the Middle East, like what's happening right now between Palestine and Israel, the Hamas-Israel conflict. And then the issue going on in Red Sea, the Houthi rebel attacks. And let's suppose if the issue between Hamas and Israel gets escalated, and the other nations within this region are dragged into it. Don't you really think that would greatly hurt, though we are not directly participating in their conflict, but because of fall in supply of oil, Indian economy is really going to pay a very heavy price. So the thing is that we cannot become self-reliant on oil. We cannot be self-sufficient, of course, no doubt, but we cannot, because we need to depend, because we don't have this resource. But the good idea is simply to reduce the dependency or diversify the dependency. That's what's the basic logic is. Securing energy supplies and then promoting exports and nurturing innovation. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you briefly what are the various initiatives the budget has proposed. I mean, the finance minister has proposed in this budget. Let's have a quick glance. And anyway, I'm going to share the PPT. So please don't spend your time writing it or noting it down. I mean, the entire PPT of what I discussed in the last class today would also be shared with you. Okay, so let's quickly go through some important things that are required and that is noteworthy for your examination. Okay, yes. So now, as such, already pointed out, in this budget, there are primarily four engines: agriculture, MSMEs, investment, and exports. And the fuel to achieve the objective is simply more reforms. And finally, the destination is the Vikshit Bharat. Okay, so let's start with agriculture. And what are the things that are new in this budget, proposed in this budget? So look at a scheme. This is a new scheme, along with various existing schemes. But how about various initiatives the government of India has brought in the last 5-6 years? And before going ahead, let me ask you a simple question. How many of you are planning to take the exam this year? Prelims. Yes. How many of you are planning to take the exam this year? Okay. So TK, so let's not spend more time on it. But one thing I just want you to remind you is, see, generally there are more than 60 to 70 schemes that have been actively being implemented, either to be central scheme or central sponsor scheme or core of the core schemes. I think you understand the difference, right, sir? Core scheme, core of the core schemes, central scheme, central sponsored scheme. I guess you understand these differences, right? Yes. So, okay, Apana. Okay. So what I'm just saying is that how do you, because if you look at last year preliminary paper, there are around 2 to 3 schemes that have been asked. In fact, come se come every year you will be having minimum 3 to 4 questions on various social welfare schemes or various schemes that are being implemented by government of India. Then how are you going to remember it? Either it has to be a scheme that's recently introduced, or it's going to be a scheme that's been in the news in the recent past, or either a scheme that's going to have a very large impact on the economy. So something of a major issue. So the one who is regularly going through newspaper, for him, he doesn't need to buy out all these 70 schemes. But I just want you to keep this in mind. Okay. So now let's look at the scheme related to agriculture. Prime Minister Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. Krishi matlab? Farmers, right? So what's basically the objective is simply to develop agriculture districts program. So look at the highlights of the scheme. The program will cover 100 districts with low productivity, moderate crop intensity, and below average credit parameters. Because as such, remember I said, okay, 10 minutes back, the government as of now is primarily focusing on not only increasing the agriculture produce, but also at the same time want to increase the productivity, yield per acre. So you see what I said, now the government is now focusing on 100 districts with very low productivity and a very low crop intensity. Because in India, since the land available per farm, I mean, per capita land available for farming is very less. The reason, the number of people dependent on farming, and look at the land available for farming, it's very low. That's the reason India may, if you notice, good part, for that matter, take the case of most of southern states or along the delta, land is being intensely cultivated because we have very less land. And good part of India also has decent irrigation. So in most of the India, most part of India, we have intensive cultivation of land. But there are some places lack of enough rainfall, or lack of proper irrigation facilities, or lack of proper integration with markets, or since the farmers being really very poor, lack of enough access to organized financial services, there's been a very low productivity and low crop intensity. So in those districts, the government want to boost the productivity. So what's the basic aim is to enhance the agricultural productivity, and then crop diversification and sustainable agriculture practices. Can someone point out the meaning of the word crop diversification? Crop diversification. Yes. And what's the crop diversification has to do with sustainable agriculture practices? Friends, let me remind you. Okay, if you notice, good part of peninsular India, for that matter, or not only peninsular India, even northern India, you could find most of the farmers of India, or most places in India, people practice monocropping. In many parts of India, people go for monocropping. Look at the delta of Kaveri, Godavari, Krishna. So many, if you know, look at most of the farmers, they go for monocropping. Monocropping does mean same crop. Whether, take the case in geography, you might have studied paddy is a kharif crop because paddy requires relatively high temperature. It requires more temperature, requires more water, it requires more labor, feeds more people. But at the same time, in geography, you might have been taught paddy is a good example of kharif crop. And wheat is a very good example of rabi crop. So summer cropping season may where temperatures are relatively high, paddy is being is suggested crop. Whereas the temperatures are relatively low, what is the best crop to cultivate? Wheat. That explains the reason why, if you notice, Punjab, Haryana, or Western UP during summer cropping season, that's Kharif, they extensively cultivate paddy. It's one of the fine quality of paddy, basmati. Isn't it? And you also might be aware of the fact one of the largest seller of food grains to Food Corporation of India is these states, Punjab, Haryana, and the Western UP. But during winter or Rabi cropping season, you would be noticing they just rotate the crop. Replace paddy with the wheat. But have you noticed any farm in south of India, in peninsular India, either in Kaveri Delta, Godavari Delta, Krishna Delta, going for cultivation of paddy in summer and wheat in the winter season, Rabi season? No, you rarely find. In fact, it's near impossible. So what I'm just trying to point out is in good part, a large part of India, farmers resort to monocropping, same crop, years together. What's the problem with monocropping? What do you think is the problem with the monocropping? Because if you're cultivating the same crop for years together, and a certain crop requires certain types of nutrients, and you cultivate the same crop over a period of time, the soil gets exhausted. When the nutrients gets exhausted, the fertility reduces, the yield decreases. And the other thing that Shiri's pointed out, very good beta, pest attack. Again, in case there is a pest attack. And moreover, let me also remind you, not only we cultivate same crop, we also cultivate same variety. There is no at least diversity. Let's suppose you are cultivating paddy, TK. But again, if it is at least there is a diversity in the type of crop you are cultivating, different varieties of paddy, then it's okay to an extent. But generally, the problem is same crop and same variety. Now imagine in case there is a pest attack, in case there is a disease, that's it. The entire crop is going to be a loss. And not one farmer, the millions of farmers would end up experiencing a huge loss, and that might end up being a threat to the food security. Am I clear? So that being the reason now, so as of now, the state is primarily focusing on diversification, crop diversification. And only when you go for diversification, when I say crop diversification, not only multiple crops at the same time, multiple varieties of the same time would also be called as crop diversification. So I don't know whether you've been to this northeast part of India. If you go to Arunachal Pradesh, you would be surprised that farmers do cultivate simultaneously 14 crops. Mixed cropping, when I say mixed cropping, they do simultaneously go for cultivation of around 14 varieties of crops. Hamara यहाँ we rarely find farmers who happens to crop not more than 2 crops. But there in northeast, they go for mixed cropping and simultaneous cultivation of around 14 varieties of crops at the same time. 14 different crops. The third, purpose of this is to augment post-harvest storage at the panchayat and block level. What do you mean by post-harvest? You know, friends, around 1.2 lakh crore worth of food produce in India is being wasted. 1.2 lakh crore worth of food is being wasted in India due to poor post-harvest management infrastructure. What comes under post-harvest management infrastructure? What comes under post-harvest management infrastructure? Make it fast. Like I said in the last class, I don't want to be like a monologue. Do participate. And there's nothing wrong in giving a wrong answer. Yes. Post-harvest management infrastructure. क्या क्या आता है? Come on. Yeah, storage, warehouse, cold storage, transportation, supply chain. You know, only 10% of food cultivated in India is processed. Only 10%. So if you look at it, then we have a very huge scope even for food process, right? And at the same time, when it comes to the integration of farmers with markets, it's too bad. Because, you know, it is generally said in India, when there is a rise in price of farm output, whenever there is a rise in price of farm output, agriculture produce price increases, the farmer is the least benefited. But whenever there is a fall in the price of this agricultural output, the farmer is the most affected. You know the reason behind it? Because of too much of middleman involved. Too many middleman involved. See, for that matter, it's the very first time, long back, when I visited Kerala, I used to have impression, because Kerala is having a, large part of Kerala is known for, plantation agriculture, especially coconut. And I assume the fact that it's been long back. I do frequently visit, but when I happens to visit for the very first time, I was under the impression, since there is a large part of land under cultivation of coconuts, coconuts might be abundantly available, and that being the reason, coconuts should be relatively cheaper. But on the contrary, I have noticed in Kochi, people charging 30-40 bucks. And out of the 30-40 rupees you pay for a coconut in Kochi, how much out of it you think actually received by the farmer? I guess hardly 1/4. Right? So on a product actually worth 10 rupees, consumer is ending up paying 40-50 rupees. Got it? So the rest of the money is being spent on the entire supply chain. And what if we have a better integration of these farmers with the markets, and at least ensure that good part of this price we are paying reaches to the farmer? Don't you really think if you could eliminate this middleman and integrate farmers with the markets better, we could avail goods and services? This agriculture produce as a consumers, we could get at a cheaper price. And when good part of this money gets paid, gets passed on to the farmer could also have experience a rise in income. Am I right? Isn't it? So that's going to be a win-win game, both for the producer and also for a consumer. So that itself is the reason lately the state has realized the importance of improving the infrastructure related to post-harvest management, and then improving irrigation facilities. Though India has a great scope of irrigating a large part of land, but as of now, can anyone name any big multi-purpose project that has been successfully constructed in India in the last 4 to 5 decades? No way. Isn't it? It's only during the tenure of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first and second plans, we had made a decent investments on public infrastructure related to agriculture. But from then, almost for the since third five plan, there's been a great neglect when it comes to investment in public infrastructure. And Shireen, I didn't understand what's the meaning of FCA. Whether I didn't mean without Shireen. FCA, what is that you'd like to find out? So I'm asking you, basically the question I happen to ask you is, can someone name any big multi-purpose project? If you notice, almost for the last 4 to 5 decades, the investment in public infrastructure related to agriculture by the governments, either by the state or by the union government, is quite negligible. So though India has a potential to irrigate a large part of its agricultural land, but isn't it, you would still notice the fact a good part, okay, a good number of independent being the predominant practice. And if you especially look at the central part of India, the dry land, where the variability of rainfall is very high, you would notice that these people happens to have hardly any infrastructure, especially related to irrigation. So that's the other initiative. And look at facilitate availability of long-term and short-term credit. That's the because, like I said in the last class, one farmer commits suicide for every 40 minutes, and this is something I picked up from National Crime Record Bureau. And if you look at most of the farmers who commit suicide, a majority of them, around 90% of them, happens to be small farmers. Of course, no, but they happens to be tenant farmers and sharecroppers. And out of these tenant farmers and sharecroppers, majority of cash croppers. Crop requires more capital investment. And most tenant farmers and sharecropper doesn't have a written contract with their landlords. You know, or they not they doesn't avail from organized financial institutions like banks. Most of these poor people depend on borrowing from the money lenders. And you know the money lender charges exorbitant interest rates. You borrow money at 24% or 30%, and in case of crop loss, you end up falling in a debt trap. So that being the reason, so now the government also has come up with a focus on improving the availability of both long-term and short-term credit. So that's basically the essence of Prime Minister Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana. Understood? Yes. And the second, okay, remember the second thing I have pointed out, building rural prosperity. Building rural prosperity and resilience. So what's basically, okay, I hope you understand the meaning of the literal meaning of the word. A comprehensive multiple rural prosperity and resilience program will be launched in partnership with the states. Because I said in the last class, Amara migration mostly from rural to migrant, urban, rural to urban, most migration. And if I have in of rural to urban migration, definitely, right? So if you are investing in food processing, you don't, okay, isn't it? Who the hell is going to simply set up an apple nectar making company in Kerala or a coconut oil making company in the Valley of Kashmir? So definitely, since the food processing industry is not a food industry, you should end up setting up industry where raw materials are abundantly available and cheap. Use rural labor migrating to urban. So how do you bring in prosperity within rural India and make it strong and sustainable economy so that it could withstand any kind of crisis? Is you need to have a multi-dimensional approach to it. That's where the second line is. Net issue. So you have a okay. Voice breaking. Oh, I see. Okay. So let me test. Okay. So give me just 2 minutes. Okay. So maybe. So time. So what I have done is, okay, I connected to my mobile. Maybe I think it might work. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Since morning, I think I'm facing this problem. But is it okay now? Are you experiencing this problem since the beginning of the class? Okay. So इसी वजह से ना बेटा, what I would suggest you, you are free to interact. Okay, so if you have any issue ना, please don't wait for me. Okay, so okay, and don't expect me that I will be okay keeping asking you. Okay, so you're free to interrupt me. Okay, yeah. So now let's move to the next initiative. The other initiative is Atmanirbharta impulses. What do you mean by Atmanirbharta? This first time the government officially has used this term called Atmanirbhar Bharat package during COVID. Yeah, the finance minister has come with around 20 lakh crore worth package, and she named it as an Atmanirbhar Bharat. What do you mean by Atmanirbharata? What do you mean by Atmanirbharata, friends? Yeah, very good. Now, Navrita, beta, it's not self-sufficiency, self-reliance. Because, okay, look at beta, Navrita, is it practically possible for a nation to become self-sufficient? Self-sufficiency does mean near zero dependency on rest of the world. Possible, hai? Right? Can US, in fact, world superpower? Am I right? Can US become a self-sufficient country, self-sufficient nation? China, one of the world's largest manufacturer, can it be a self-sufficient? No, self-sufficiency is near impossible. So the very basic essence of Atmanirbharata is self-reliance. And I guess you understand the meaning or difference between self-sufficiency and self-reliance. Because why, especially during COVID, we have pointed out, let's suppose, imagine if my economy, my economy is experiencing a contraction. I mean, falling output or falling economic activity or contraction economic activity. And the rest of the world is doing good. So in such case, definitely I could expect, isn't it, some support, or I could expect that by simply change in my exchange rates or by somehow I would be able to revive my economy with the support of the other nations. But if you look at during COVID, every nation happens to experience severe contraction. And do you really think it does make sense for India to expect any such kind of external support so that it would help rescuing economy out of crisis? No, right? Because everyone is experiencing the same problem, severe contraction. And it was that time India has realized the importance. We need to be self-reliant. I mean, those things that we are capable enough, we should reduce our dependency on other nations. Like I was saying, simple logic. Why should India has to depend on import of Ganesh oils from China? Why should India has depend on import of the cigarette lights from China? Why should India has depend on toys, the toys that kids play, firecrackers? Don't you really think India cannot afford to produce? And do you really think that requires a very complex raw materials and it's not at all available in this country? Not a big deal. And we've been producing it. And because of lack of proper environment to produce more output, we lost to the Chinese markets, Chinese competitors. And these Chinese competitors who could afford to produce the same goods at a relatively cheaper prices, now they're dumping in markets like India and capturing our markets. And as a result, we are experiencing deindustrialization because of our markets getting flooded with Chinese goods. And when you could afford to produce the same, let's say, take the case of oil. As I pointed out, India doesn't have enough oil reserves to meet its demand. So definitely it does make sense India has to depend on rest of the world. But India depending on imported food grains from rest of the world, I don't really think it does make sense. But prior to Green Revolution, India used to be dependent on imported food grains. Maybe you might be aware of the fact. Right? And the Green Revolution in India has made India self-reliant and also made sufficient with respect to food grains. So when it comes to food grains, we have sufficiency. But when it comes to overall agriculture produce, we're not at self-sufficient. Right? Yes. So that being the reason, so now the government, like I said, since we import a good amount of pulses from various nations, now the government want to achieve Atmanirbhar Bharat in pulses. So you could simply think, sir, how could India could afford to cultivate pulses? Because none of the land in India is suits to cultivation of pulses, or our agriculture or climatic condition doesn't suit to cultivation of pulses. It's not the case, right? The entire central part of India itself is good enough to cultivate coarse cereals, oil seeds, pulses. So maybe there might be some structural challenges why we are not able to, okay, come up with such a great yield. Now the government has made up its mind something similar to national mission for edible oil seeds. The government now also would like to come up with the Atmanirbharta in edible oil and also pulses. And the next most important initiative is Makana board in Bihar. Can you name any board that is in Kerala? Any agriculture board, like coffee board, tea board? Yes, Makana board, because they're very basic. I think you all heard about this Makana, right? Which has become now, okay, very popular and now is being called superfood. And especially the Western people are going crazy. And that being the reason, if you just notice, and okay, some 5 years back, hardly people being aware of the fact something about called Makana, and that relatively it used to be cheaper. But because of increase in the global demand, now you'd be noticing, I have noticed, they say, okay, so they're being traded around 50 rupees for 100 grams. An exorbitant rise in price because of a huge rise in demand. And Bihar is the largest producer of Makara. Heard about it, my friends? Makara? How many of you heard about Makara? Right? Huh? Okay. So coming back to, so the very basic essence of Makana board is to improve production, processing, value addition, marketing of Makana. So the government also has come with an initiative to set up a Makana board. Yeah, lotus seeds. In fact, it's not exactly lotus seeds, but it's basically the seed of water lily. People though call it lotus seeds, it's not, it's seed of lotus, it's basically the water lily. So our next we move on to National Mission of High Yielding Seeds. High yielding seeds. What do you mean high yielding seeds? You already heard about high yielding variety of paddy and wheat that has resulted in making India self-sufficient with respect to food grains, right? So the seeds that's been developed by Norman Borlaug and brought into India by Mr. Swaminathan, MS Swaminathan during Shastriji government, right? So now the government, in order to increase the productivity, now also want to encourage high yielding seeds, okay, to increase the productivity. So that's the other major initiative related to agriculture. So what's basically targeted development and propagation of seeds with high yield, pest resistance, and climate resilience. Because if you notice, in the last 4 5 years especially, the inflation is primarily due to volatility in prices or rise in prices of some perishable commodities like tomato, okay, onion, and these foods. I mean, vegetables and fruits. Or the basic. I mean, this basket is contributing to high inflation in India in almost in the last 5 to 6 years. And the reason because of a severe shortage of these particular commodities in the market. And that being the reason, in order to work on this challenge, the government has made up its mind we should come up with a climate resilient, because the heat waves, even during the winter months, is increasing. And most of these crops, especially tomato, if you notice it, it's though it's cultivated both in Kharif and Rabi season, but it's abundantly cultivated. Around 60% of the yield is during the Rabi season. And when the average temperature increases, obviously what happens to the yield is reducing. So now the government is also focusing on developing seeds which are not only going to result in high yield, resistance to various types of pests, but also would be resilient, climate resilient. Okay, so that's the other major initiative, National Mission of High Yielding Seeds. Okay, and then related to cotton productivity. Now look at one important thing that you should notice is enhanced credit through Kisan credit cards. As of now, my friends, okay, as per mark, okay, in agriculture interest subvention scheme, Farmers in India can avail a crop loan of to maximum 3 lakhs. And in this budget, the government has increased it from 3 lakhs to 5 lakh rupees. So that's the other thing I want you to remember. Those people especially writing the exam this year. And now comes to MSMEs. And now coming to MSMEs. So coming to MSMEs, if you notice, okay, as of now, let's look at the importance of MSMEs in the economy. As of now, there are 1 crore registered MSMEs, employing 7.5 crore people and generating 36% of manufacturing. Am I clear? Not only around 36% of manufacturing, around 45% of exports are contributed by MSMEs. That's the importance. So now what's the most important that you should notice when it comes to MSMEs in this budget is, so here are some facts related to MSMEs, but let me just quickly read it so that you would have a better understanding. Okay. So now if you look at, as I said, there are 1 crore registered MSMEs. What does MSME stand for? What does MSME stand for? Micro, small, medium enterprise. What is the criteria for categorizing an enterprise as micro, small, medium? What do you think is the criteria? Friends. Yes. Can someone point out what do you think is the criteria? Very good. Fantastic. Isn't it? It's based upon the capital invested and the turnover. It's capital invested and the turnover. In fact, until 2021, it used to be mostly, I mean, the enterprise are categorized into micro, small, medium, only purely based on capital invested. 21, there is a change in definition where the current Modi government has also introduced the turnover as a component to define and categorize the enterprises MSMEs. Got it? And in this budget, there is a change in the definition by simply changing these two elements, capital and also turnover. But before that, let me also, because in the last years, we have at least one question from MSMEs. Okay, either in mains or in prelims. So as I already pointed out, these are the facts that you should have it on your fingertips. One, that 1 crore registered MSMEs employing around 7.5 crore people, 36% of manufacturing output, 45% of our exports. So don't you really think that is a backbone of our industrial economy? And it's high time India has to protect and promote MSMEs. And that too at times, of course, right now, as I already pointed out, we're experiencing a rapid deglobalization. But if you look at in the name of globalization, if Indian economy has been more liberal, more open in attracting investments, until unless we have strong MSMEs which could withstand these large competitors coming from other parts of the world, we would not be able to realize the dream of making India. Am I right? So it is high time we need to protect them, promote them, make them strong enough to withstand any kind of competition. Friends, in good old days, there used to be a practice in India where a certain basket of goods and services used to be reserved only for MSMEs. And that is how we used to protect MSMEs. And a significant goods, the number of goods and services in those days is especially reserved for MSMEs. Especially reserved for MSMEs does mean large enterprises are not allowed to produce those goods and services that are reserved for MSMEs. And that's how we used to protect MSMEs. Of course, we do have certain basket of goods right now reserved, but the basket, the number of goods reserved for MSMEs has drastically cut off. But since MSMEs happens to be backbone of Indian industrial economy, it is high time India has to protect it. Got it? So now let me just give you MSMEs contributes 29% of Indian GDP and around 40. Okay, so that's basically what I have given recently the updated. So now if you look at it, they contribute around 30% of Indian GDP. And for India to become a $5 trillion economy, don't you really think protecting MSMEs is a need of the hour? Okay, so we'll just have a glance of the revised definition of MSMEs. Micro enterprises. Okay, the current investment one here in this case in terms of crores. So 1 crore investment and 5 crore turnover is as a micro enterprise. And now the revised is 2.5 crore investment and 10 crore turnover. Small, okay, 25 crores and 100 crores turnover. Medium enterprises, 125 crore investment and 500 crore turnover. Okay, so I don't think that you should mug up these facts, but at least ek do bar dekho, because in prelims, if they ask you a question, you will be able to recollect it rather than by hearting it. It's just simply look at it 1-2 times. Okay, so what's the initiatives the state has brought in, especially with respect to MSMEs, is credit card for micro enterprises. Like we have a Kisan credit card, where farmers, rather than simply applying a loan from a bank, and then most of you might be aware the fact the harassment from the banking sectors and simply documentation, which is really gone and become a tedious task, because a farmer, if he is simply running after the banks to avail a credit facility, then who the hell is going to taking care of this agricultural activity? So the state has now come with an initiative where farmers have been given a eligible farmers are given a Kisan credit card, and they could avail a credit facility as per modified agriculture interest subvention scheme. Remember, I said the government has increased the limit from 3 to 5 crores. So same logic holds true. Can someone name one or two schemes related to credit support schemes related to MSMEs? How many of you heard about Mudra? Have you heard about Mudra? What does Mudra stand for? Yes, friends, what does Mudra stand for? Micro units development refinances. Don't you think it's one of the many initiatives? There have been n number of initiatives, out of which the state has come up with one initiative in the name of credit without collateral. Very good, Peter. Okay. So now the government, something similar to the farmers in the name of Kisan credit cards, the state also has come up with a proposal to issue credit cards for micro enterprises. Micro enterprises, so that they could easily avail credit without a huge documentation. Got it? And then the government also has come with a very great idea, fund of funds for startups. What do you mean by fund of funds? Funds for startups is self-explanatory, where the government would now come up with certain separate funds, and that's what the government would use it to promote startups. But what do you mean by fund of funds for startups? Yes. Funds for startups is self-explanatory. But what do you mean by fund of funds for startups? Come on. We're running out of time. What do you mean by fund of funds? Come on, friends, make a guess. I'm just giving you 1 minute. Okay, guess what could be the meaning of the fund of funds? Hmm? Come on. Anyone? Okay, like mutual fund. Very good. Fantastic, Navnita. Yes, very good. Okay. So if you notice, generally, okay, take the case of mutual fund. Very similar to mutual fund. So if you look at mutual fund, so how would you explain mutual fund to me? Basically, if you notice, I mean, basically the fund of funds is very similar to mutual fund. Because what do mutual fund companies do? They mobilize money from investors. Am I right? Because maybe most of you might be interested in investing in stock markets. But the problem with us is neither we have enough time to track the markets, nor we have enough expertise to figure out what stock to pick up, when to enter, when to exit. These are the things we might not be good at. Am I right? And believe in me, investing in markets requires a very good understanding of market and a very good understanding of economy. But many of us pursuing different careers might not have enough time. So what do? We just simply take the help from a professional investors, fund managers. That's what mutual fund. They mobilize funds, and these funds are again diverted for investment in various other business. So they do take this money. The money collected from the investors is what they invest in different portfolios. So same thing holds good. So when it comes to fund of funds, it's an investment strategy of holding a portfolio. Holding a portfolio. It's an investment strategy of holding a portfolio of other investment funds. rather than investing directly. You got it? Yes. And then the last and the most important, okay, sorry, okay, food product schemes, support for food processing. So there is already a scheme by name Pradhan Mantri, okay, scheme for formalization of micro food processing industries. I guess you might be aware of the fact. It's a scheme that's named as Pradhan Mantri scheme for formalization of micro enterprises in food processing industry. Because if you notice, in most part of India, the food processing, though there is enough food processing units in India, most of them are micro and they're not properly registered. They're not properly registered. But until unless you have your entity registered, you would not be eligible for various kinds of initiatives from the government. So now the government want to formalize. How come? By ensuring they get registered so that they could avail all kind of support systems. Is there anyone in this discussion who have ever come across one product scheme? I mean, focus product scheme, one district, one product. Maybe in railway stations, you might also have come across these stalls, right? One district, one product. Dekha? Has anyone have come across these stalls in railway stations? One district, one product stalls. No? That too, my friends, in Kerala, many regions and many districts are extremely popular for certain types of goods and services. You might have noticed it. Okay, or maybe you might have ignored it. So the next most important thing after agriculture and MSMEs, the other most important thing is related to investment. So when I say investment, so don't ever think when the word investment the government refers is only in the context of investing in roads, physical assets. So generally when it comes to investment, remember I said investment is defined as capital formation. Capital formation. Or in fact, for that matter, infrastructure. Any expenditure that results in generation of some infrastructure. But infrastructure ka matlab nahi hai, it should be only the roads, buildings, the tangible investments. No. The infrastructure, maybe in school days, you might have been aware of the fact is classified broadly into physical infrastructure. Like what you call the roads, buildings, and then expressways, plant, property, equipment, all those things, the tangible. The second is investment, mostly in education health, is referred as social infrastructure. Because this investment helps in building human capital. Invest in roads, railroads, airports would help in creation of physical capital. But investments in education health would result in generation of human capital. But other than physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, in the modern days, you also might be frequently coming across a term called digital infrastructure. Can someone in the class give me a example of a public digital infrastructure? A digital infrastructure government has created, which is accessible to all the people. Public digital infrastructure का एक example दे दो. Yes, friends. ENAM, very good. UPI, Aadhaar, fantastic. Okay, DigiLocker, DigiYatra, isn't it? Very good. That's it. So that's it. So when it comes to infrastructure or capital formation, don't just confine your thought only to the physical infrastructure that the roads and highways that are being built. No, it could be social it could result in social infrastructure that builds human capital. It could be on digital infrastructure. Am I clear now? Yes. So now that's what's the reason I pointed out. When I say investment, don't ever confine your definition of investment only to physical infrastructure. So here in this case, the first and foremost is investing in people. Okay, in what time? Shaksham, Anganwadi, and Poshan 2.0. Because this is already a scheme that is being implemented. Now the government has come with a small tweak in it. That's it. So the Saksham Anganwadi and Poshan 2.0 program provides nutritional support to more than 8 crore children, 1 crore pregnant women, and lactating mothers all over the country, and about 20 lakh adults and girls in aspirational districts and the Northeast region. So it's simply a basic small tweak. It's a scheme that's already been being implemented. So there's nothing new in it, but now the government has allocated more and at the same time has made a small tweak. And Atal Tinkering Labs. And I do expect this would be a potential question. Atal Tinkering Labs. What is basically the purpose of it? 50,000 adult tinkering labs. What do you think is the purpose of this tinkering labs? Will be set up in government schools. Next 5 years to cultivate spirit of curiosity and innovation and foster scientific temper among young minds. Believe in me, there is great chance this could be a potential pursuit. Adult tinkering labs. In fact, many a times you might have noticed a good number of people are pointing out the current generation, especially. Okay, though they happens to be highly innovative, but most of the current generation is losing this basic curiosity innovation. And especially in those parts where the learning has become almost more or less the routine, academic literacy. So we're not focusing on the functional literacy. So that being the reason, the government has come with a proposal to set up adult tinkering labs, around 50,000 adult tinkering labs. That's with the intention to promote the spirit, cultivate the spirit of curiosity, innovation, and foster scientific temper among the young minds. That's the most important thing, and I would suggest you to remember this. And the other important thing is Bharatiya Bhasha Pustak scheme. So the proposal is to implement Bharatiya Bhasha Pustak scheme. What's the purpose? To digitize or provide digital form of Indian language books for school and higher education. Because I think I don't know how many of you heard about it. It's around 1-2 years back, the Prime Minister himself happens to come with a proposal. Why is it even these science subjects like engineering? Well, if you have you been to Germany or anyone happens to be? If you've been to Germany, which is a very small state, my friends, a small country compared to India, the entire academics. So generally, people might have a perception. If you go to German university or if you want to have an admission in German university, believe in me, German language is mandatory. You rarely find a university where you've been taught any skill in English. They do just in German. Same as, of course, China is a very big country, hence they could teach it. But only in India you could notice. Almost all higher education institutions, the medium of isn't it? The medium is by default English. It could be better, not could be law, it could be architecture, isn't it? But at the end of the day, no matter how comfortable you are, it's still a foreign language. And there's always a scope for people to acquire knowledge better if it is being inculcated in a mother tongue. Am I right? And that's the reason, in fact, quite long by the Prime Minister himself has pointed out why. Why not we teach engineering? Because at the end of the day, the laws doesn't change in whatever the medium you communicate, right? Right? Does Pythagoras theorem or the result of Pythagoras do change if you teach people in Malayalam? I don't think so. So इसी वजह से ना, in order to ensure people would have a better absorption, so the government is also now trying to emphasize on inculcating skill set at the same time in promoting the learning in the vernacular languages. And the other most important is with respect to PM Swanidhi. PM Swanidhi is basically a credit support system for street vendors. Okay, in fact, along with these poor farmers, the tenant farmers and sharecroppers, most of the street vendors also happen to heavy reliance money lenders who charge exorbitant rate of interest. And in order to support them, the government has come with one more initiative, PM Swanidhi, and this is not the new scheme in this budget; it is already being implemented. Okay, yes. And then the public-private partnership infrastructure. Okay. So now let me add one more thing. Let's look at the last part. But one asset monetization plan. Kabhi suna a plan by an asset monetization plan? So the government now wanna extend this asset monetization plan, for the next 20 years. Sorry, 5 years, 25 to 2030. What do you mean by asset monetization plan? Asset monetization plan. Come on, make it fast, friends. Asset monetization plan. See, this was an idea the government has brought in during the COVID phase. Okay, so I'll tell you, let's say during COVID, we all know the fact the economy has experienced severe contraction. Except agriculture sector, every sector in India has experienced a great fall in economic output. Only agriculture sector, because those days, if you could recollect, there is no restrictions or movement of farmers. They've been given a certain time, and the only thing is that they are not allowed to assemble in public. But only agriculture sector or farmers in rural India, they have not been imposed any restriction. So it was in the year of 2021, the COVID year, only sector reported positive growth is agriculture, around 3.4. Industrial sector, service sector experienced severe contraction, and the overall economy has reported negative growth. So during this period of time, you know the fact, for the government or for the economy to revive, government needs more capital. But the problem, if you really want to increase investments in infrastructure, the state has to mobilize money either in the form of taxes. But at a time when the economy is already in severe contraction, people are already being overburdened with taxes, the government figured out it doesn't make sense taxing people more. And that too, when this great increase in unemployment, how dare you impose more taxes? So raising capital by increasing taxes, not a viable idea. Then if not taxes, what's the other alternative? What's the other alternative? Borrowings. But the same problem. If the government itself end up borrowing a lot of money, no matter whatever could be the intention of the state, remember in the last class I said, it results in crowding out effect. It results in crowding out effect. It results in increasing interest rates and disincentivizes the private investors borrowing money. So that's the other challenge. And at the same time, when people are not making enough money to meet their ends meet, how do you really think they would have a surplus to lend money to government? Isn't it? So the second option, isn't it, doesn't seems to be a viable option. First option, depending on taxes, doesn't seems to be a viable option, especially during COVID. Then what else? Third option, disinvestment. I mean, sell the assets, whatever you own. But don't you really think the idea of disinvestment? Because when you disinvest, when you sell an asset, you lose the ownership rights, isn't it? And don't you really think it doesn't seem to be a viable idea? Complete, okay, keeping, okay, disinvesting for the sake of meeting your financial needs. Then you might be asking, then why is the government disinvesting? So don't ever think the government is disinvesting in public sector enterprises just to raise some money so that it could use this money for payment of salaries, interest on the loans. No way. You know, the money mobilized by government through disinvestment is maintained in a fund called National Investment Fund. And this National Investment Fund is what is maintained as in public account of India. So don't ever think government disinvests in public sector undertakings so that it's badly, okay, because it's badly in need of money and it needs this money for payment of salaries or to meet some revenue expenses. No. Your teacher might have discussed about the importance of disinvestment. What's the rationality behind disinvestment? What's the rationality behind privatization? Why would government generally transfer ownership of a public asset to the markets? Privatization. Am I right, Beta Navanita? Isn't it the meaning of privatization has been transfer of ownership from the state or from the public to the private? Right? What do you think is the reason behind privatization? Like say Air India, recently been privatized, which was national long back, has now been privatized. So why? What do you think? How do you explain the rationality behind privatization? Why would government privatize? Government has not made a plan to close it, because you might be saying, sir, the Air India has been making enormous losses. So if someone happens to make huge losses, ideally, what should be the alternative? They should end up closing the business. But the government has not closed the business. The government has transferred the ownership to the, it happens sell it to the private, right? So what do you mean by privatization? And what is the rationality behind privatization? Beta Navnita? Anyone? What's the rationality behind privatization? Very good. Help free of public resources for other use. Very good. Fantastic. Oh, of course. इसके अलावा बेटा, can you add something more? It frees up public resources. The reason is, imagine, take the case of Air India. Every year you're just making loss of around 1,500, 2,000 crores. So if you own an enterprise and if you own a business that keeps on generating more and more losses, don't you think now the state has to use some taxpayers' money to let the airlines fly? Which is gonna be a burden on the common man. So now the government thought, what if I don't really take this pain or bear this pain of running it. So that at least I would be able to show that, okay, 2,000, 3,000 crore rupees of loss that I'm making. Because if it is regularly making losses, then I should end up using the taxpayers' money to let the airlines fly. Agar in case if I don't take this responsibility and hand it out to someone else, then I would end up saying okay, around 2 to 3,000 crore rupees per annum, right? Yes. And at the same time, the other most important advantage is, so you might be thinking, now the question follows is, if government was not able to let the airlines fly and it's resulting in losses, then why would a private sector would buy a loss-making airlines, a loss-making company? Simple, isn't it? So you might be thinking, what is the rationality in someone buying a loss-making company? Because the reason here in this case is a company might be making losses, not that it doesn't have the demand for the goods and services itself. It's not that there's lack of demand for goods and services. A good number of companies do make losses because of inefficiency. And one most important advantage of privatization or private sector running these enterprises is that brings in efficiency, efficient usage of resources. That explains the reason why Tata's, as soon as the government has made up its mind, Tata's happens to come forward and said, we are ready to. It's not that, don't ever say historically it is the Tata Airlines is what government has nationalized, and that's the reason now Tata's came back to bite back. No, because Tata's happens to have a strong perception and belief that since the government has failed, Casey, because of its inefficiency, and if now they take it, they could simply go for maximizing returns by efficient utilization of resources. Let's suppose, imagine I own a factory that produces a video cassette player. Krishnan, let's imagine I am the government and I own a company that produces video cassette player. And since no one is buying a video cassette player, definitely my company would not be selling any good and my company would not make any revenues, and that would result in huge losses. And if we put forward a plan to privatize, do you think someone would someone would be coming forward to buy a factory? No way. Because the product I'm producing itself is not having any demand. But that's not the case with airlines. And you look at it in 2018 budget, the government has proposed to privatize Visakhapatnam steel plant. The reason why? Simple, the same logic holds good. Because the government, was not able to efficiently manage resources. Am I clear now? Yes. So now during COVID, the government has figured out, I cannot keep on disinvesting. And let me also conclude this part. So the money the government mobilizes through disinvestment is maintained in a fund, separate fund called National Investment Fund, which is maintained as part of Public Account of India. And this fund is professionally managed by professionals. And what do they do? What do you mean professional management of a fund? They invest this money in the economy back, and the returns on this investment is what the government uses. 75% is used for welfare activity and 25% is used again to reinvest back in the economy. So don't ever think government uses the proceeds of disinvestment to meet its revenue expenses. No way. Got it? So now coming to the idea of monetization. So now the government during the COVID has figured out. Since I cannot mobilize money through taxes, nor through disinvestment, because if I want to disinvest, if I want to sell shares, there should be an appetite in the market to buy the shares I happen to buy. Nor I could raise money through borrowings. That's where the government has come with an alternative, monetization of public assets. Casey, how do you monetize? Simple. The simplest explanation of monetization is simply give your assets on a lease basis. Lease the public assets. And when you happen to offer these public assets for lease, you not only generate a good amount of money, you also retain your ownership. But if you disinvest, you would end up making quick bucks. But at the end of the day, you're gonna lose the ownership rights. But again, if you monetize or if you just simply provide your assets on a lease basis, you mobilize. I hope you understand the difference between renting it and leasing it. Renting and leasing, right? Which is for a longer period of time, renting or leasing. Yes, friends. Lease. So lease helps in generating a good source of good amount of revenue, and at the same time, the government doesn't also not. I mean, it's also okay. The government gonna keep the ownership rights. So that being the reason, the state has come with a plan. And during COVID, when the plan was proposed, the idea of government is mobilize around 16 lakh crore rupees of money. Of course, the government was not successful in rising in the last 5 years about 16 lakh crores, but now the government want to continue the same policy for the next 5 years and need certain public assets to rise enough for capital. Got it? And then the Jal Jeevan Mission, which you think you might be aware, is to provide a drinking water supply. Okay. So, and then there are certain initiatives, my friends. Okay, deep tech funds, deep tech fund of funds. What do you mean by, okay, again, it's a fund of funds like startups for deep tech, for the upcoming technologies and data. And then these are some initiatives I'm going to share because we are running out of time. Okay. Yes. So exports. So what I'm going to do is, okay, my internet seems to still have a problem. Okay. So I'll quickly wind up this part of budget and we'll just look for a economic survey. Okay. So exports के लिए, okay, one thing you should notice is the government now has proposed again a digital public infrastructure by name Bharat Trade Net. So like we have just now we have referred to digital public infrastructure like DigiLocker, BIM, UPI. The government also has proposed something called a digital public infrastructure by name Bharat Trade Net for international trade will be set up as a unified platform for trade documentation financing solutions. So that's the essence of it. Okay. And then the global capability centers. Can you name any global capability center? I mean, what do you mean by global capability center? What's the meaning of the word global capability center, GCC? Come on, friends. Have you ever heard about a gift city in Gujarat? How many of you heard about a gift city in Gujarat? No? Okay. So what I would do is, since we don't have enough time, okay, so I'm just typing it here, gift city in Gujarat. So do spend some time, friends, okay, because we are not having enough time, okay. So, okay. And then the various reforms the government has proposed is reforms in taxation. And at the same time, the government also has come up with a proposal to increase foreign investment in retail, okay, insurance sector. And at the same time, India Post Office Payment Bank, because I think you already are aware of the Nachket More committee recommendations related to financial inclusion. Right now, we have Airtel Payment Bank, Paytm Payment Bank. So generally, payment bank, unlike the regular bank, doesn't offer any credit services. They do only accept deposits and they don't lend money to markets. Then what do they do with the deposits? 75% of what are the money they happen to accept deposits is what they invest in government bonds. And rest of 25% is what they lend to other banks or maintenance deposit with other banks. So they don't lend it. You might be asking, what's the point of running a bank? We don't lend, because the problem is when you run a bank, you are supposed to, at some point of time, or since some okay proportion of your deposits or your loans might turn to become bad asset, non-performing asset. So in order to encourage financial inclusion, in order to encourage more investors, okay, coming into banking sector with less capital required, because as of now in India, if you want to float a commercial bank, you need 10 years of experience in finance industry and minimum 1,000 crore capital required. Now when it comes to payment bank, you only need 5 years of okay experience and still 100 crore rupees of investment. Moreover, unlike other banks, since you're not exposed to markets by lending money, you don't okay experience any problem of NPS, non-performing assets, because 75% of your deposits is with the government in the form of government securities. Baki 25% is in the form of deposits with other banks. So no way you end up experiencing any default on the loans you extend. Got it? and then the investment friendly. So the government now has also has come up with a ranking. Okay, that is what is called investment friendliness index of states. Yeah, they I was referring to something called ease of doing business. And World Bank, until recently, World Bank used to come up with ranking various countries based on ease of doing business. And it's been discontinued because China has done some manipulation. It's been now discontinued, but now the government want to propose the same thing. It want to simply rank states based upon investment friendliness, because that helps in promoting the spirit of competitive federalism, right? So there has to be competition among states to attract more investments, isn't it? And in order to promote that competitiveness within the states, the government has come up with a idea to come up with an index related to investment friendliness. What do you mean by index, Navadita? How do you define a term index? Yes, index is simply nothing but an indicator. So it's an indicator the government has proposed, which helps in ranking the states related to investment friendliness. Okay. So in fact, this is good enough when it comes to budget, and what are the things required for examination is what is being covered. Iske alawa, I would suggest you don't need to spend much time on anything more. Okay. Yes. So now we do have 30 minutes, but at the same time, the problem with internet connection. So what I would do is I would schedule the lecture for next, okay, sometime later. And these are some previous questions, almost all previous questions from 2013, and I'm going to share the PPT so that you could just go back and revise these questions before you go for the examination, so that you would be able to revise every topic related to finance, public finance. Okay. And this part of economic survey is what I would take up. Okay. And I will let you know, maybe, isn't it? So I will talk to your management and I will see, because I don't really think 30 minutes I will be able to complete it. More, I'm having a problem with my internet connection. Okay. So what I would do, I am going to stop this from now, and I would resume it, and I will let you know what exactly is the time and when I'm going to schedule it again. Okay. Got it? Any doubt? Anything you want to ask? Yes, friends, anything you want to ask? Because, okay, 1 hour is more than enough. Okay, I'll take some this lecture. Don't worry. 1 hour is enough. But right now the problem is I'm experiencing problem with the okay uh, internet. Okay, yes. Shireen, you want to know about Gift City? Is that right, beta? Yeah. See, basically GIFT. Okay. So it stands for Gujarat International Finance Tech City. So I said, na, Global Capability Center. Global Capability Center. What do you mean Global Capability Center? Simply does mean where you would have a certain platform like SEZ, Special Economic Zone, which is meant for boosting exports, where we designate some part of our own territory as a foreign territory with respect to taxation and exempt it from taxation so that people could export. Something very similar to SEZ, Special Economic Zone, is what we call. But when it comes to Gift City or when it comes to these global capability centers, you don't have, okay, I mean, the intention is not only to boost exports, you would have every infrastructure that is required for an organization to function. Okay, and right now the state of Karnataka is also doing I mean happens to bring in various initiatives, and now they're planning to have a capability center, a global capability center somewhere in the vicinity of Bangalore. Got it? So if you have any doubts related to fiscal policy, though, okay, I mean, video streaming seems to be a problem because of, okay, consumes more data. But when it comes to voice, I think it would serve the purpose. So if you have any doubts, okay, do let me know related to public finance, related to budget. I would be happy to clarify, and we will take the economic survey later. So come on, friends, anything? So let me stop sharing the screen so that, okay, it would save some. Okay. Yes, any doubt, friends? Related to public finance, okay, any term you don't understand, do let me know. Else, we're going to wind it up and resume it sometime later. Feel comfortable, make it fast. Okay, so I guess none of you have any issues. So that okay, so we're going to resume it, and I'll let you know the date and time. Thank you. Goodbye.